Yeah, this movie's ape shit. Monkey Man, starring, directed, and written by Dev Patel, is about an anonymous young man who ekes out a meager living in an underground fight club where night after night, wearing a gorilla mask, he is beaten bloody by more popular fighters for cash. After years of suppressed rage, he discovers a way to infiltrate the city's sinister elite. As his childhood trauma boils over, his mysteriously scarred hands unleash an explosive campaign of retribution to settle the score with the men who took everything from him. Now, I'm going to first get it out of the way that the trailers for this movie do not tell you what this is at all. This movie, while it does have action sequences in it, isn't as much of an action movie as you would have come to expect from the trailers. There are a lot of emotional beats to it, and it's not just nonstop action. There is a pretty clear attempt at a narrative in this movie. The action sequences in this movie are very cool and fun to watch. There is a little bit of shaky cam, and I absolutely despise shaky cam, but it's shaky cam in a way that I really haven't seen done before. It really isn't that noticeable and isn't that discombobulating outside of one police chase sequence where you couldn't tell what was going on whatsoever, and that was pretty sloppy. But the actual fight choreography, the fight sequences, you can watch, you can see everything that is going on, but it's in a very claustrophobic way, and it makes you feel very disjointed, but in a very good way. It makes you feel like you're in the action sequence yourself and the chaos of it all. And I think that the camera work in this movie, it's very unique. And while some people might complain and say that it's shaky cam and that you might not be able to see what's going on, I think that most people can still get a pretty good idea and see the fight choreography for what it is. And it is an effective way to shoot this movie. It's a very bold, very confident directorial debut from Dev Patel. For him to go about these scenes these ways and shoot it these specific ways had to take a lot of confidence. They were very gritty, very rough around the edges, very just brutal to watch. And I think that that's a lot of the production of this movie leaking over into the making of it. Dev Patel said that he had broken his hand, he had broken his toes, he had broken a lot of things in his body. Netflix backed out of this movie, and if it wasn't for Jordan Peele, I don't think that this movie gets released, and if it does, it's only on video. The emotional beats in this movie, I think, really worked. I don't think that the narrative and the way that we got there necessarily did, but I think the end result, he got the messages that he wanted to get across, and they delivered in a pretty effective way. But I just think that the process in getting there wasn't that great. Now, there are a lot about Indian politics in this movie, and I'm not going to sit here and pretend like I really have any idea what's going on with the political sphere of India. I know that this movie is extremely critical of Hindu nationalists, and I don't know if this movie is ever going to get released in India. I looked, and it doesn't seem like they're planning on releasing it in India, which isn't too surprising, but the political messages, the political undertones in this movie are very well done. My biggest complaint with this movie is the overall narrative and the pacing of it. It's pretty all over the place, and it makes you feel like there's supposed to be action sequences going on when there aren't any. It builds you up in the music of everything, and the music's very good in this movie. I want to get that out of the way as well, but it's building up, and it makes you feel like you're about to watch an action sequence, but you're really not. So the pacing of it's a little bit off. Again, that police chase sequence with the shaky cam was not a pleasant experience to watch whatsoever. You couldn't tell what was going on. And then the overall narrative of this movie is a little weak. Once he, spoiler alert, minor spoiler, once he goes off into the jungle in the second act of this movie, it really slows down. Again, another problem with the pacing in this movie. But it really slows down, and you meet these village people, and they're basically going through what he went through when Dev Patel's character was a child. And you're just kind of seeing a rehash plot point that he had, and it's a pretty weak narrative point of the story. The message of this movie is pretty cliche. It's pretty simple. It's effective, but it's not all that thought provoking of how he has to find a purpose to fight. Because early in the movie, when he was in that fight ring, as I mentioned in the synopsis, he was just getting beat for money. And once he goes to the jungle, he finds his purpose to fight. It's pretty simple. Again, not too thought provoking. But when he comes back in the third act, really the only training that he does in the jungle is punch a punching bag for a few times, and then he, like I mentioned before, he just gets his ass beat in the first act of this movie, not just by the people in the fighting ring, but just in general, he gets his ass beat. And then in the third act, after he punches a punching bag in the second act, he's able to take down an entire room of people, which doesn't really make sense. And they incorporate the village people into the third act, and there's really no point to have them in the third act. And then this is probably my biggest complaint. Some people might see it as a minor nitpick, but this is a pretty big, I wouldn't really call it a plot hole, but just major inconsistency. So again, minor spoiler, but him and his friend get caught up, and they're called terrorists by the end of the first act. But he's able to go back to the fighting ring in the third act, which doesn't make any sense, because I have a feeling that the people in the fighting ring and people would recognize his friend, and they'd be like, "We saw you all over the news. You're a terrorist. Why are you just able to walk around in the opening day?" And his friend really doesn't do anything after the first act. He just keeps kind of showing up and not really doing anything. None of his scenes are really worth anything whatsoever. They don't really do anything with his character. But the fact that they were able to show up and there were no consequences for them coming back to the city is just a pretty big issue for me, because it's just a pretty big inconsistency, I'd say. But I don't really think that that ruins the movie. But I enjoyed Monkey Man. I give it a solid 3.5 out of 5 stars. You can go follow me over on Letterboxd, see my rankings and ratings for everything. Link for that, again, down in the description below. Make sure to follow us over on Twitter as well. Make sure to like, comment, subscribe, all that fun stuff. Make sure to ring the notification bell as well, and we will see you in the next movie review.